Tonight, the government considers a controversial plan to scrap juries for all trials except murder, rape and manslaughter. The Conservative leader says it would erode the foundation of our justice system. The Welfare Secretary has told Sky News that backlogs are denying justice to victims. Also ahead tonight, Donald Trump says that a deal on Ukraine is close as the Prime Minister here convenes European allies to pledge more support for Kyiv. A flurry of last-minute announcements, from milkshake taxes to minimum wage rises, as Rachel Reeves prepares to deliver her budget tomorrow. We'll look at what we already know. Our economics editor, Ed Conway, will have all the things you need to look out for tomorrow and tell you why it might all be a big fiscal drag. The government announces its plans for a third runway for Heathrow, which includes moving the M25 motorway. I'll talk to a billionaire hotel magnate about whether the government has a credible plan for infrastructure and what he makes of plans to tax the wealthy. And as Donald Trump performs the annual turkey pardon, should we be giving thanks? For this is one tradition we don't have here in the UK. Well, talking Turkey with us tonight are James Starkey and Baroness Luciana Berger. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening and welcome to the programme. Of course, we are going to be talking a lot about tomorrow's budget, and that's going to be later in the programme, because we're going to start with what would be a major shake-up of the court system under proposals that are being considered by the government. Jury trials might be scrapped for all cases except the most violent crimes, and that is due apparently to reduce backlogs. Well, in the last hour, I spoke to the Cabinet Minister, Pat McFadden, and I asked whether the government were looking at doing this.
Well, I don't think the MOJ have confirmed details of the story that's out, but what we do know is there's a very significant backlog in the court system. There's an old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Ministry of Justice were looking at changes as to how they could clear that backlog and make sure that people get justice in good time.
And if this does happen on a principle basis, and as you said, the MOJ haven't confirmed it, you're not aware whether it has been confirmed or not?
I'm not aware that it has, but we do know there is significant concern throughout the government in the court.
So it's possible. I mean, juries have been at the foundation of our justice system for a very long period of time. I mean, this would be quite the move, wouldn't it?
Well, of course, there will still be jury trial.
Only potentially for some of the most significant court cases.
The story says that it may be for a narrower range of alleged offences. Let's see what the MOJ have to say about that. We do, of course, value, respect and cherish trial by jury, but we also have to cherish the idea that people can have their case heard in court in good time. And we've got an enormous backlog, and simply doing what we've been doing for the past few years is not addressing that backlog sufficiently quickly. So I wouldn't be surprised if my colleagues at the MOJ are looking at perhaps some radical ways in how they can reduce that backlog.
And we'll have more with my chat with Pat McFadden on the budget a little later on in the programme. But let's get more on this story with John Craig, our chief political correspondent, who you can see was with me in the studio. John, we think this is something the government is seriously looking at, and it would be quite a serious change.
Well, we know they're looking at it because, of course, they commissioned an independent report by Brian Leveson, the former appeal court judge, probably best known for his press inquiry a few years back. Now, what is controversial about what Mr Lammy looks as though he's going to do is the fact that Sir Brian recommended ending jury trials for crimes up to 3 years in jail. Mr Lammy is saying 5 years, which means far fewer trials would have a jury. It's only rape, manslaughter, murder and what's being described as some public interest trials. Now, this all started when Shabana Mahmood was the Justice Secretary. She commissioned that report by Leveson. Sarah Sackman, who is the courts minister, says drug dealers and career criminals are laughing in the dock, knowing cases can take years to come to trial. And she talks about them criminals gaming the system. That's what they're trying to stop. Because, of course, they try to increase the chances of proceedings collapsing. And she also said victims of severe sexual assault are routinely told it could take 4 years for their cases to come to court. Now, the legal profession doesn't like it. Barristers, solicitors, the Law Society, for example, says it's gone beyond the recommendations by Sir Brian Leveson. It goes too far. Kemi Badenoch has said it risks fairness, undermines public trust. And David Lammy used to agree. That is true. Back in 2020, when David Lammy was the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland was Justice Secretary, Lammy said the right to trial by your fellow citizens is fundamental to our democracy. So there's going to be a huge row about this. It'll have to have legislation, and we're told that's going to come in the new year. The Ministry of Justice says no final decision has been taken. But as we've heard from Pat McFadden, ministers know about this. There's a document's been circulated in Whitehall. Ministers have been briefed. Could face a tricky passage through Parliament, not so much the Commons, but those pesky peers, all those lawyers in the House of Lords, judges, ex-judges, barristers, QCs, KCs as they are now. Very controversial, this.
Indeed it is, John. I'm sure David Lammy argument would be that COVID is obviously one of the reasons that there is this enormous backlog. John, as always, not a pesky chief political correspondent. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we may well have a pesky member of the House of Lords with us. That, of course, is Baroness Luciana Berger. And, of course, we've also got our duo tonight alongside Conservative Special Advisor James Starkey. Very good evening to you both.
Good evening.
What do you think of this?
Well, I think it's addressing what is a crisis in our court systems. We know that there's a backlog at this time of around 80,000 cases, and you just shared, as you just heard, the experience of people facing going through courts for issues as serious as rape, having to wait currently on the current trajectory, like 4 years. That's not acceptable. And while the government have done a lot, I think, to address what has been a crisis and continues to be a crisis. We've seen £94 million go into legal aid. We've seen an additional 5,000 sitting days in our courts. We've still got this significant backlog, and we need to do something to address it. And looking at the Brian Leveson report, what was very important about that was that he was clear that we need to see some structural change in our system as it currently stands. We know that around 90% of cases as it stands are not tried by court, and not tried by jury in court. And so we do need to see changes to the system, and I want to see that expedited.
James?
I wonder if we'll see a bit of a rollback in the new year, closer to Leveson's original proposals. Because I think when you're getting that much flack, it's going to be difficult to defend. And the other point I'd make on this is, my worry with this will be, we've seen some controversial cases around freedom of speech issues. I think what I can imagine in 6-12 months' time, if this comes into force, that we'll see this kind of leveraged, if you like, by reform to say, well, the reason we're getting these verdicts now is because Labour's done away with trial by jury. So I think this will be a hot political issue in the coming couple of months.
Isn't the argument, though, here that actually there is a backlog, no one's going to deny that, and lots of people are being denied justice, but in the end, like, trial by jury has been at the foundation of our judicial system, that rather than going, right, we need to get through this really difficult period and kind of chuck the kitchen sink at it to get these trials as quickly as possible, that we're kind of losing something quite important for what should hopefully be a temporary thing.
Well, there's a few things on that. I mean, certainly one of the fundamental ethoses of our system is that we should have our cases tried in a timely manner. That is not happening at this moment, despite additional investment has come forward. We need to address that. And I'd also look at the issue currently, where we have some cases, for example, some serious fraud cases involving issues to do with cryptocurrency that are currently tried by jury. And juries themselves say we do not have the expertise to address and to contend with these issues. So I do think we need to look at what's currently being tried by jury, which is only 10% of cases at this time. Obviously, we don't have the detail yet.
No, we don't.
And the detail is going to be very significant to properly interrogate the proposals as they come forward.
Just very briefly finally on this, James, isn't this kind of some of the radical things that maybe the government should be doing, frankly, to sort. I mean, people want quite significant change to sort out big fundamental problems. To be fair to the government, this looks quite radical.
I mean, 2 points on that. One, I'd have a lot more sympathy if David Lammy himself hadn't come out against it within the last 5 years.
Yeah, but hold on. The big argument about this is COVID. He said that in 2020, didn't he? I mean, COVID has been an absolute... It's made this so much worse because obviously lots of trials simply did not happen.
But I think this is a number of things that Labour, in opposition, attacked the Tories for and have come in and have found out it's a lot more complicated. That's not to say I don't have sympathy with them on this issue. I think Luciana's right, is that things like complex fraud trials are probably better off not being heard by a jury. But, you know, politically, the problem is Lammy is now the Justice Secretary and he himself came out against this just a few years ago.
Okay, very, very quickly.
John,
last word to Robert Jenrick. He says Lammy should be getting the court sitting round the clock. And he says the Lady Chief Justice has said the government turned down extra court sitting days.
OK. John, as always, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there, our chief political correspondent. OK, let's move on because there's another big story today, an international one, and that is, of course, Ukraine and Russia. Because there have been those continuing peace talks to bring an end to that war. While the wording being used from all parties is delicate, we do know that Kyiv supports the essence of a proposal put forward by the US, even if some of the most critical details remain unresolved. This evening, Donald Trump, the US president, give us this update.
I've also ended 8 wars in 9 months, and we're working on that final war. It's not easy, but I don't know. I think we're going to get there. 25,000 soldiers, Ukraine, Russia. In the last month, 25,000 soldiers have died. So I think we're getting very close to a deal. We'll find out. I thought that one would have been gone quicker. We did 8. I thought that would have been an easier one, but I think we're making progress.
Well, meanwhile, back here, Sir Keir Starmer chaired a meeting with Ukrainian allies known as the Coalition of the Willing, where he told leaders that talks are moving in a positive direction.
We, the UK, are ready to move with the EU on providing financial support based on the value of the immobilised assets. This is the best way to show Putin he should negotiate, rather than trying to outweight us. And it's the best way for us to be ready to support Ukraine in war or in peace. And of course we need to keep supporting Ukraine's defence. Ukraine is holding the line fearlessly, and it's the line of their sovereignty and their defence, but it's also our line as well, because this is about European freedom, our values and our security. So they need our support, and more support now, to defend their people, their cities and their infrastructure, whether that's energy or civilian. And we've all seen the attacks that continue day after day, night after night, particularly intense in the last week or so. And so the UK will deliver more air defence missiles in the coming week. And I urge everyone in that spirit to dig deep and see what more support you can provide.
Well, let's go now to Washington, D.C. and join our US correspondent, David Blevins. David, very good evening to you. Lots of positive noises emerging around this, but my word, seems a hell of a lot of detail to get sorted too.
That's right, Darren. I think all you've got to do is listen again to those comments a short time ago from the President of the United States. He said, I think we're going to get there. I think we're getting close to a deal. I think we are making progress. 3 times in a very short space of time, he used the word think. You and I both know that there is a vast difference between thinking something is going to happen and knowing it is going to happen. And that adds to the sense of vagueness around the commentary today, with the administration talking about them having reached a common understanding on issues with Ukraine, and also about Ukraine supporting the essence of a deal. That feels very far short of a breakthrough agreement. Nonetheless, Zelensky's national security chief says the Ukrainian president will travel to the United States at the earliest opportunity in November to try and complete a deal. Well, November comes to an end on Sunday, and Donald Trump is going to be at Mar-a-Lago in Florida for the Thanksgiving holiday from this evening until Sunday. That's what's fueling speculation that Volodymyr Zelensky may actually travel to Florida rather than to Washington. If he finds himself himself face to face with Donald Trump there, of course, he may feel a bit isolated and under pressure to sign up to an agreement that is more to Russia's favour. And remember how heavily he has relied on the Europeans in the past. It was European leaders who built a bridge between Trump and Zelensky at the Vatican after their showdown back in February. Those European leaders came here to Washington en masse in August when Zelensky was concerned about what had taken place during the Trump and Putin summit in Alaska. And when he finished a very complicated and difficult meeting with Donald Trump last month, he went straight into a call with those European leaders. And that's because perhaps he knows Donald Trump is desperate to get this deal done. He vowed to end this war in 24 hours. He's been president for a year and 20 days, and still the war rages on, and he's under all sorts of pressure on the domestic front as well. So is very keen to conclude some kind of a Thanksgiving agreement, but we're way short of that right now.
OK, David, live for us there in Washington. Thank you very much indeed, David Blevins. Let's bring back in James and Luciana, who are with me in the studio. James, is your sense that President Zelensky, Ukraine's essentially being bounced into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Trump do this repeatedly. He's kind of presented the fait accompli. I think the one positive aspect for Zelensky is the first presentation of the 28-point plan was almost to take it or leave it. It seems pretty clear there's some open for some negotiation, but with Trump, you just don't know. And I think the point about him going over there, like we saw, the thing that's going to live long in the mind whenever Zelensky goes to see Trump is that first press conference and how he was treated. And I think that's the fear that you have, is you just don't know how it's going to go when he gets over there.
And the question is, of course, or the point is that he would never have done that to President Putin, and that shows, and he's a relationships guy, that relationship he has with the different leaders. Just to see on it in terms of our part in all of this, I mean, we saw Keir Starmer having that video conference call this afternoon. It also feels very much that we're kind of part players. We're kind of slightly sidelined in this, that in the end, this is something that if it is going to be sorted, effectively involves Russia and the United States and not really us.
Well, certainly, I don't accept that at all. I think it's very important that we have us involved. I'm
not saying it's not important, but it does feel that we're not fundamental to all of this.
Well, we have to look at what's happened since Sunday. If we look at, it started with a plan, it was a 28-point plan. We've now come down to 19 points. And I think in part that was largely driven by our contribution and that of our European counterparts. That was the representations that were made and in support of Ukraine, which, is really important, that they're not just making those positions by themselves, and they are supported. We've, I think, shown that support very significantly financially as well in terms of how we've supported the Ukrainians since the start of the war. But ultimately, it requires a coalition of the willing, as we've seen, to make sure that the deal that's reached is one that's fair and ensures that we see a just peace for Ukraine. Because if it was what Trump is advocating for and has done and did at the start of the weekend, that isn't going to be fair for the people of Ukraine.
OK, it is going to dominate this week, undoubtedly, and it is going to dominate many of tomorrow's papers. Those negotiations clearly continuing on, and we'll have got our extended press preview from 10:30 tonight. That's with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us tonight, as you can see, will be the political commentator Adam Bolton and the journalist and broadcaster Sonia Soda. Well, back domestically, there is going to be a story that's going to dominate us here in the UK, because we are just one more sleep away from the budget, one that will not just define the future direction of the British economy, but indeed the government's success for the rest of this parliament. Now, in theory, you aren't actually meant to know what's in that famous red box until Rachel Reeves stands up at the dispatch box tomorrow lunchtime. I think it's fair to say that we've got pretty good sense of what's going to be in it, because speculation's been rife, rather chaotic at times in recent weeks, and the past few days have been jam-packed with announcements. Let's have a look at just some of them. The Chancellor has said that the NHS prescription charges in England will be frozen for the second year in a row. Rail fares are also set to be frozen for the first time in 30 years. The state pension is set to rise by more than 550 quid a year from April under the triple lock. All care leavers are to be guaranteed full student loan support. And there's set to be a crackdown on benefit fraud with an extension of the task force which clamps down on inaccurate universal credit claims. Luxury cars will no longer be available to mobility recipients, with the government saying more money will also go to British manufacturers under changes. The Health Secretary said today that they will expand taxes on sugary drinks to include milkshakes and those pre-packaged coffees. The national living wage and the national minimum wage will be raised. And finally, and I do mean finally, a tourist tax will be introduced, meaning visitors may have to pay to stay in an area overnight, although down to local mayors whether it will actually apply. Let's bring in Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor, who's with me in the studio. Sam, is there any point for a budget tomorrow? After all that list, I mean, what else have we got to come?
Well, finally, we get the whole shape of it and the detailed list, because that was just a fraction. We know the title of it. It's going to be called Strong Foundations, Secure Future. It has not felt secure, the run-up to this budget. This is a moment where Rachel Reeves has to go back to the country and do what she said that she wasn't going to, which is to raise taxes on a substantial to a substantial degree. She has a black hole. That black hole that needs filling is somewhere in the order of 25 to 30 billion pounds, massive by the terms of our budgets recently. And the reason for that is because she's got to fill lots of holes because her MPs want more welfare spending. And she's made a number of choices that will see her have to, for instance, find cash in order to freeze fuel duty. And then on top of that, she basically has been running things a bit too hot. She's been taking her borrowing levels, her spending levels too close to her borrowing limit, and she's got to give herself what's known as a bit more headroom, but that all costs money as well. And the taxes that she has to raise in order to do that, well, famously, she backed off a big increase in income tax, which would have made it easy. So rather than one big measure, there are going to be loads of smaller measures. So she's going to freeze the personal allowance for income tax, so more people end up being dragged into tax. That's one of the biggest. She's going to bring down the tax-free allowance that you have on your pensions. The most expensive properties, likely those over £2 million, so quite often in London, are going to face additional council tax charges. And then there are the smaller ones that you mentioned at the start. And then I would expect some smaller surprises. And I think the sheer scale of what we're going to get tomorrow, now quite far into a parliament, which we were promised wasn't going to happen, just presents jeopardy on so many different levels, partly political, but she's also doing this to satisfy the markets, so there's more than one audience.
And just briefly, Sam, what's been fascinating for me, and I put this to Pat McFadden a little later, is the lack of the use of the word growth anymore. We're told that this budget is going to be about raising living standards, the cost of living crisis, cutting waiting lists and cutting the debt. I mean, given it's apparently the number one priority, there's actually been thus far very little talk about economic growth.
There's a really straightforward answer for that, which is that growth is going to be downgraded in tomorrow's budget compared to what it was the last time the watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibility, reported back in March, downgraded in every year for the rest of the Parliament. They would say because of the decisions by the OBR themselves rather than decisions the government have made. But certainly Rachel Reeves hasn't kick-started the engine of growth. They talk instead about the cost of living. They hope that that will mean that the lower costs for certain things like prescription charges, rail fare, will mean the Bank of England lowers interest rates faster, which could kickstart the economy in a year or two. But it's not the same as being able to point to Britain's one-time trend growth of 2 or 3%. Things are just a lot more sluggish than they once were.
OK, Sam, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll be seeing lots of Sam tomorrow for our coverage here on Sky News of the budget. We'll also be seeing a lot of our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who's been taking his own look at some of the biggest challenges facing the Chancellor tomorrow.
It was a year ago. That was the budget where Rachel Reeves said this was going to be the big tax-raising budget. She wasn't going to have to come back for much more. How have things changed so much in just 12 and a bit months? Well, the main thing you've got to know about this, OK, there are two factors here. The first of them is the fact that the economy isn't doing as well as a lot of people had hoped. This is just showing you productivity, which is kind of the best measure of how well off, how much better off we're getting each year. It's our bang for our buck across the economy. And up until 2008, it looked like that was kind of going perpetually higher. But then, as we all know, it didn't go higher. So it's basically flatlined or gone up really weakly since then. You can see the pandemic there. And the gap between where we might have been and where we are now is 23%. We are 23% poorer than it looked like we might have been. And that feeds into everything else. So that's 23% less in tax revenue, which means a hole in the budget. So that's number one part of the hole, and we're going to hear more from the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, about that. The second part of the hole is a year ago or so, Rachel Reeves had all these plans about cutting welfare, and a lot of them haven't happened. And as a result of them, these U-turns, the welfare bill is forecast, this is forecast off into the future, is forecast to carry on rising. And so those two things together, extra spending on the one hand and less money coming in because the economy's not doing as well, they're the two main dynamics overshadowing this budget, raising the question, what does the government do about it? Well, the main answer, we suspect, is going to be something economists call fiscal drag, which I know is terrible terminology. I'm going to illustrate how it actually works, though, because this is really important. It means basically you're raising extra money without having to raise the rate of income tax. That's showing you the median income, so average salary, average incomes across the economy before tax, going back the last few years. And this is the critical thing, is the personal allowance. That's basically the point at which you start having to pay tax on your income. So anything below that line, that's untaxed income. Anything above the line, that's tax. That's the tax, basically, that you have to pay. And here's the key thing. Look at that line. Under the coalition government, they increased that quite a lot. And then, in the last few years, that has been left flat. And as it's been left flat, have a look at this. As that's been left flat, the gap between these two has got bigger. The amount that we have to pay on our earnings in tax has got bigger. And if, as is expected, Rachel Reeves decides to leave that flat, so to freeze the personal allowance for another few years, look at what happens here. Even if our earnings go up, the amount that we're squeezed by taxes goes up. And just to kind of underline this, back in 2019, 52% of income of the average earner was taxed. If that continues, it's going to be 64%. So that brings in quite a lot of extra money because we are going to be paying more in tax because of fiscal drag. But the question is that Rachel Reeves is facing, how does she raise the other money that basically will fill that hole in her budget?
Ed Conway there. OK, you're watching the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Up next, we'll have my chat with the Work and Pension Secretary Pat McFadden amid that flurry of announcements ahead of the budget. Find out what he has to say about growth and the budget after this break.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. It is the eve of the budget, and a little earlier I spoke to the Work and Pension Secretary, Pat McFadden, about what's going to be announced tomorrow and whether the government really is still keen on economic growth. Let's have a watch. What would really help, of course, those on low incomes is economic growth. Is that still the government's number one priority?
Yes, we want to see economic growth. We had the
Is it still the government's economic...
It is the government's economic priority. Okay. We've had the fastest growth in the G7 in the first half.
Yeah, in the first half, it was 0.1% in the third quarter of this year. I mean, we're now in the second half of this year. I say that because I've got the embargoed speech or the trail ahead of the budget tomorrow and for tonight and tomorrow. And the Chancellor literally mentions economic growth once in an entire document and in a video she's made. Is it? If it's the number one priority, why is she not talking about it?
Well, we talk about it a lot. We talk about it all the time. But one of the things that could hit growth is if the productivity estimates, which are a backward-looking measure, affect the future projections of growth. This is a revision in how the economy's been doing over the past 10 or 15 years, which we know is in the works. And if that happened, that could affect growth projections in the future.
I mean, they've been downgraded, and by the OBR, we believe, for the rest of this Parliament year after year. I mean, you're not delivering on growth. I mean, that's something... Last year, growth was 1%. It might not even reach that this year. I mean, that's pretty pathetic, to be honest, for a government that still claims it's the number one priority.
Let us see not just what the OBR says, but what they say lies behind their productivity measures and how they affect the future growth estimates. What we've done to protect growth is to radically change the public investment projections that we inherited so that we can invest in the infrastructure the country needs, the houses we need to see built, the transport infrastructure. All of that was scheduled to be cut back after the election last year. We changed that picture. We are also turning around the public services because we know that a sick nation does not contribute as much to economic growth.
Okay.
So for the first time in many years, we have waiting lists falling, people more ready for work. That is a better trajectory.
Yeah, and what we're not seeing is delivery.
What
we're not seeing is delivery on apparently the government's number one priority, which, let's be honest about, you are talking about less and less. Anyway, you're 18 months, or been in power for 18 months. What would you say is the most radical thing this Labour government has done in its first 18 months?
I think the best thing we've done in the first...
No, the most radical thing I asked you.
The most radical thing is probably to turn around the failing NHS.
Well, you haven't... I mean, you've got waiting lists a bit. You haven't turned it around.
Well, we've started...
Has Pat McFadden genuinely claimed you've turned the NHS around?
I think we've started the process, which is a very different trajectory from what it was on. When we came into office, the NHS had the lowest levels of public satisfaction.
I asked you, what's the most radical thing this government has done? Essentially, trying to change the NHS is not particularly radical. That's what a Labour government should do. That the point is, you haven't done anything radical, have you?
Well, I don't accept that at all. I think turning around the position of the most important public service in the country is an important beginning. It is just a beginning. We've been in power now for 17, 18 months. But turning that round is something that the previous government failed to do in 14 years. It got progressively worse. The public knows that. It's one of the most important reasons why they voted to elect a Labour government. So I'm afraid I can't accept your dismissal of this important achievement.
Just finally, I want to bring these two things together. Just finally,
into the economy
the reason I'm coming at this is because we have got sluggish economic growth. That's just a fact. And also, I would suggest you haven't done anything radical, particularly when it comes to the economy. Why don't you look at Brexit again, at our relationship with the European Union? The OBR, the Bank of England, the Treasury, the IFS, and this week, the National Bureau of Economic Research all say it is the biggest drag on economic growth in this country. Why are you implementing a deal, Boris Johnson's deal, that you think is bad, when it is, according to all these, including the Treasury, a drag on growth?
Well, let me say two things in response to this. First, I think the impact of Brexit should be recognised. The OBR estimated it would be a 4% hit to the economy. That's a big hit to the economy. That's the equivalent of a
So why not do anything
pretty
about
bad
it?
recession. You then say we didn't do anything about it. We've actually negotiated 3 important trade agreements this year, one of which has been with the European Union.
And how much is that expected to drag back that 4%?
Well, we will not. We're not going to rerun the argument, but within the terms that we fought the election, which is that we respected the vote.
You could rejoin the customs union. That's got. Brexit was leaving the European Union. There are countries that are part of the customs union where we could do trade and remain outside of the EU. That's not betraying Brexit.
The leadership challenge for any government after the Brexit vote was to make the best of the decision the country had made. Now, one of the biggest things that has been a drag has been the food and agricultural exports, the extra paperwork, the extra costs. That's at the heart of the agreement that we struck with the European Union. That will make a real difference to what is the biggest export in the country, is the food and drink industry. And so this is important progress. We've recast the relationship with the European Union, which you can see not only in the economic field, but also in the security field too.
OK, let's bring back in our duo for tonight. I mean, tomorrow, I should say, is going to be a difficult day for the government. I think there's no way to get around that, is there?
Well, obviously, there's still some detail. Despite all the things that you set out, there are still things that we don't yet know about, and we will wait until around 12:30 tomorrow to hear the Chancellor make her budget statement, to see that whole package. And we know that there are still things that are yet to be uncovered, and so that detail will be important. But certainly, the government has to make some challenging decisions in the face of the climate that we find ourselves in, some of which, to the issue around growth and the Office of Budget Responsibility, they're going to come forward with these revised projections, but they're also going to, as I understand it, reveal, what are the drivers for what the levels of growth might be. And we know already, it's not a surprise, we heard it in your previous report, that we are still bearing the scars of things like the pandemic, which had a very significant impact on our economy. Austerity for many, many years had a massive impact as well. And certainly we are contending with the challenges of a failed Brexit deal, and we should acknowledge that.
That's true, but also if you listen to budget business, about last year's budget, they would say increasing taxes on business has cost jobs. Peter Keir was on at the weekend admitting that the non-dom stuff has led to a lot of wealthy people leaving this country. Would you at least accept that Labour are now part of the reason why the economy is not doing well?
I think we suffer because of global challenges, and that we also, as a country, like many other countries, contend with the challenges of very high borrowing costs, which were not the case previously. We've also got those scars that we refer to, and at the heart of that, I would accept and contend that that failed Brexit deal has reduced our productivity by at least 4%, and that's a conservative estimate. So we have to acknowledge what is 3 different elements at the very least which are contributing to it domestically, along with international challenges and forces, including geopolitical challenges, which are making a massive impact on our economy. And we have to face that, and that's the reality that we face. We can't just shy away from it. That's what the Chancellor's contending with.
That's fair, because some of actually quite a lot of this stuff is quite structural to Britain. It's been around for quite a long time.
The problem is none of these things are a secret. So before Labour got into power over 18 months, or just around 18 months ago, it's not like that, but we didn't know we'd been through COVID. We didn't know that the effects of austerity and the kind of rerunning the Brexit argument, which we've been doing repeatedly for 10 years. The problem with that is the large scale of the public don't believe it, and the other part of the public will say, if that's really the problem, and that's why you're putting our taxes up, why don't we just rejoin? And the Labour Party aren't offering that. So I think
there's a distinction between revisiting the Brexit argument and addressing the issue of a failed Brexit deal, and that's certainly what I think we're contending with.
But I don't understand what exactly they're doing to address the issue of a failed Brexit deal. It's just a constant recitement of some of the old figures. And so I think these things were all known before, is my point.
Well,
None of these things are secrets.
We do have new figures about the impact on our economy, and the Conservative estimate is that it's impacting us by 4%.
But these major structural changes, they're not new. And Labour came in and promised, they made a series of promises, which Rachel Reeves is now, after a U-turn, bound to tomorrow, on to not raise taxes. And that is why we're going to get this array of taxes. We've had them spread out before us for weeks and weeks before the budget. That's why we are where we are. And I think the reason why there's a bit of a lack of sympathy for that is because none of this stuff should have been a surprise with Labour going to government for the reasons set out.
And almost, isn't the problem that actually this problem has in some ways been created by the government, because the Chancellor has boxed herself in with those economic fiscal rules, which means you can't really significantly change tax in an easy way. They do, I think, want to find growth, but are really struggling with it, which, to be fair, lots of Western European countries are as well. But then on top of that, they've got backbenchers who aren't prepared for any spending cuts in any significant way that could bring down the deficit. It's kind of the worst of all worlds for the Chancellor.
Well, I look at what the Chancellor set out as her priorities for this budget. I mean, you touched on it at the very start of this programme, and it's worth reiterating that this is a government with a Chancellor who's very much focused on how we can cut the cost of living crisis, which is a serious reality that millions of people in our country contend with. This is a government is set on cutting waiting lists, and yes, they've made a massive progress. As you know, we've seen massive progress with cutting waiting lists, but there's still a lot more to do within the NHS. We've also got a responsibility to cut the cost of debt. We're spending £100 million a year on servicing debt.
And I would say the best way to do all that, and I think everyone would agree, is to find economic growth. This was a government, a Prime Minister who said you cannot tax your way to growth, and yet taxes are going up yet again.
And there's many things the government are doing. And I know from the time that I'm sat in the House of Lords, where we're dealing with things like the planning bill, for example, dealing with infrastructure bill, that, you know, the government is very serious about unlocking some of the challenges that those sectors have faced, and to make sure that we've got the opportunities to unlock growth in the UK. We've got some very structural issues that legislation is contending with, and I think that will make a really important difference to our trajectory on growth. We've also seen billions of pounds of investment come into this country. We've heard about the Clean Jobs Plan, creating 300,000 jobs in clean energy, real opportunities. I met with GB Energy earlier today. You know, some really fantastic things that are happening right across the country at the cutting edge, where that is going to, I believe, create growth in this country.
And just very finally, James and all this, isn't the honest thing that, and actually the IFS said this before the last election, no one really has any answer, like genuinely proper answer to these questions. We all live, like, you know, the Conservative Party committed to the triple lock, which costs money. The Reform Party's economic policy, we don't really know what it is, but if they want to go down the deregulation, smaller state route, their voters wouldn't like it. No political party seems to have an actual answer to the big structural problems that face this country.
I think that's the big question: is are people prepared to be radical enough? I mean, Luciana said they are doing some relatively decent things on regulation and planning, but the really radical thing would have been to say we're going to do these in months. We're going to roll through this in the House.
Who's holding it up?
Well,
it's Conservatives in the House of Lords.
You have plenty of the majority to move through this.
Not in the House of Lords, we don't.
But my point is, I think if are people prepared to do the radical changes, like that is what you're going to need to do to get through this, because you can't tax your way out of it.
I can tell you that the late nights that we've had in the House of Lords is because
we don't have a majority. It wasn't our MPs that have pushed through, that blocked the welfare cuts, which is what you need. This is why we're going to get the tax rises tomorrow.
Well, we're obviously going to see. We're seeing reform come forward on that area.
James, Luciana, for the moment, thank you very much indeed, because I just want to bring you a little bit of breaking news that's come into us here at Sky News. It is from a social media post from Donald Trump that is on the prospects of the peace deal in Ukraine. We talked about a little bit earlier in the programme. This is what the US president has had to say. Over the past week, my team has made tremendous progress with respect to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, a war that would have never started if I were president. Last month, 25,000 soldiers died. The original 28-point peace plan, which was drafted by the United States, has been fine-tuned with additional input from both sides. And there are only a few remaining points of disagreement. In the hopes of finalising this peace plan, I've directed my special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to meet with President Putin in Moscow, and at the same time, Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, will be meeting with the Ukrainians. I will be briefed on all progress made, along with the Vice President, J.D. Vance, Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wills. I look forward to hopefully meeting with President Zelensky and President Putin soon, but only when the deal to end this war is finally or in the final stages. Thank you for your attention to this very important matter, and let's all hope that peace can be accomplished as soon as possible. That's President Trump making or placing that post on social media in the last couple of minutes. Mark Stone, our US correspondent, is live for us in the United States, in DC. Mark, That optimism seemingly getting more and more concrete from the US president throughout the afternoon there in DC.
Yes, he is putting a positive spin on things for sure, but clearly not enough optimism to warrant a visit by the Ukrainian president to the United States, which had been sort of raised as a possibility. I mean, clearly the Ukrainians are ready to travel at any point, and I've been told that that is the case, that behind the scenes they were telling the White House, look, Zelensky can come to Washington or indeed to Mar-a-Lago whenever it is deemed appropriate. The sense we're getting is that from the American side, perhaps being briefed by Europeans and also by the Russians, who we do not think are on board with this at all at the moment, a little more time is needed. And so my sense from looking at the president's statement there on Truth Social is it's kind of a holding statement, but within it, some important points. The fact that he's now sending Steve Witkoff to meet President Putin in Moscow, and at the same time, Army Secretary Dan Driscoll to meet with the Ukrainians. Dan Driscoll is an interesting character. He's a very close friend of J.D. Vance, the vice president. They were at Yale together. He is kind of the number 2 civilian in the Pentagon. He's underneath Pete Hegseth. He's the secretary of the Department for the Army. And he has emerged in the past week as a key figure, dealing with the Ukrainians quite a lot. He was in Ukraine last week. He met Volodymyr Zelensky. He gave Zelensky what was back then a 28-point plan. And he was the guy who discussed that plan with Zelensky. So the fact he's going back to Ukraine to meet the Ukrainians, having spent at least a day in Abu Dhabi talking, we think, to the Russians there, that's significant. So look, I think where are we? I guess kind of into the long grass for a bit, and then maybe by the weekend into next week, more progress. Certainly all sides will hope.
OK, Mark, as always, thank you very much indeed. And Mark will have more throughout the evening here on Sky News, not least of all on The World tonight with Dominic Waghorn at 9 p.m. OK, let's return to politics back here and indeed to tomorrow's budget. The build-up has been dominated by talk of wealth taxes, mansion taxes and other measures to raise money from the better off. Well, earlier I spoke to the billionaire hotel magnate Surinder Arora about how he feels looking ahead to this budget tomorrow. Surinder, we've of course got this big budget tomorrow. What's your impression how Labour have been running the economy for the last 18 months?
Look, we all have our own views and issues, and certainly I've always been very open to say, of course, things could be done differently. But when the government are there, they've obviously got to make their own decisions, their own tough decisions.
But are taxes too high, for example?
Sorry?
Are taxes too high, for example? Is that stifling business?
I've always been of the view that and I always use the example of Ireland, that after the 2008 crisis, when Ireland were practically bust and they were going to the IMF for help, for funding. And what did they do? They dropped their corporation tax to one of the lowest in the world. And what did that do? All the major companies, including Google, Microsoft, Starbucks, everyone said, let's move our European HQ to Dublin. So you had more companies moving there, paying tax, but very competitive tax. And I think if we do live in a great nation. If we want to be the best, it's not always the most expensive. And I very much hope that the Chancellor will look at this, because now even the government, from what I've been reading in the last 48 hours, are saying, look, we realise a lot of these wealthy folks are leaving or have left the nation. What we mustn't do is be scared of entrepreneurship. We mustn't be scared of or actually looking at people.
Some of your friends have left, haven't they? I mean, you're a wealthy person in this country. Have you been tempted to leave the UK?
Yeah, and I came up a few weeks ago and said, yes, it's always in your mind when you take professional advice, what's right to do. And we've said, regardless of where we are, I came to this great country at the age of 13 with nothing, and God's been kind and we managed to make a good life, good business, where we employ over 3,000 people. And although it's painful, but we've decided as a family that we're going to stay here, work in the UK, pay our taxes. Hopefully the government will revisit this, or future governments will revisit this. I mean, we're very proud to be employing over 3,000 people. So I've got no intention of running around trying to do something. I think I'd rather be here in the UK and do the best we can.
OK, and just very finally, Surinder, Rachel Reeves might be watching this. As I say, you're a senior business person in this country. If you could see one thing in the budget tomorrow, if you had one message for the Chancellor tonight, what would it be?
I think my only message would be that we must celebrate the success of successful people, entrepreneurship. We'd rather have more people in the country rather than scare them away. And actually, those people staying in the country are going to hopefully contribute more to the nation. Yes, there are difficult decisions to be made, whether it's to do with business property relief, inheritance tax, those kind of things. I wish and hope that over the coming months and years, the Chancellor would look at this and say, what's actually right in the long term? I'll just give an example, which I always do, that if you look at my hotels, and if the hotel was half empty, am I going to put the rates up? Or am I going to drop the rate to get more bums in beds and fill up the hotel? I'd rather be more competitive. And I very much hope that the Chancellor looks at this tomorrow and have more people stay in the country and pay tax than all pack their bags and disappear.
Surinder Arora there, speaking to me a little earlier. And of course, we'll have full coverage of the budget here on Sky News with Sophie Ridge starting from 11 a.m. Tomorrow morning. We're going to take a break now on the Politics Hub because we're going to talk about something very, very different after the break. It's one of the most unique traditions in all of politics, the American Thanksgiving turkey presidential pardon. It did happen today. It does look there that Donald Trump's about to throttle that turkey, but I promise he didn't. No harm, no foul. We'll be talking about this issue and whether we should have something equivalent here in the UK after the break.
This is the moment Kim's life changed forever.
Mum, the doctor's coming in a minute and he's going to tell you that they need to amputate all your limbs. I didn't want to live like this.
This is the story of how she cheated death, rebuilt her life, and the extraordinary NHS team who made it happen.
This is the most precious gift I've ever received in my life.
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Sky News, get the full story first. It's legal to let go.
Set the speed and take the hands off.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shots rang out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
She's preparing the ground to raise taxes.
The budget, I've got to do the things that I think are right.
There are tax rises coming down the track.
You can't rule out further tax rises. It's exactly what she's going to have to do.
She'll be talking about that when it comes to the budget.
We'll be talking everything money as the Chancellor reveals what's in her budget.
Goodness knows how it's going to play out if these tax rises are announced.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, I can promise that no animals were harmed in the making of this next piece, not least of all that turkey that Donald Trump looks like he's about to throttle, because the US president did what he does every year, and that is the annual Thanksgiving turkey pardon. And there's certainly nothing like it here, thankfully, some might say. Today at the White House, Donald Trump granted clemency to, wait for it, Gobble, that's the name of the turkey, who's going to live out his years on a farm in Virginia.
Are you ready? Gobble, I just want to tell you this very important. You are hereby unconditionally partnered.
I mean, Gobble looked pretty pleased there. I mean, he should be, because he's not going to be carved up for Thanksgiving. James and Luciano were with us. This is a very odd tradition, isn't it? I think it's fair to say.
I think all countries have their strange traditions, and that certainly is one of them. I wouldn't want to see us import it here, but you know, interesting to see.
James, if you were the Prime Minister and we could bring pardoning, I always think it's the weirdest thing about the United States is the president can pardon not just turkeys but anyone. But if you could, what British tradition would come closest, do you think, to this?
What British tradition do we have?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think we have anything kind of like these American things. Maybe we should bring in some. Maybe the Prime Minister should be able to pardon someone at Christmas. You know, a wayward rebel in the party or something.
Well, we've had those issues with llamas in the past. Was it a llama? Do you remember?
Oh, was it DEFRA when we had? Wait, no. Oh my God.
Was it an emu or something? You know, where. No. I think politicians maybe should get more involved in all of this.
Yeah.
We do have political stunts in this country, to be fair.
We absolutely do, but I think there's lots of things that could go wrong when you're involving animals. And, and I think
don't mess with. I did a stint at DEFRA as a special advisor. Do not mess with animals. It's never going to be
like Kimmy Badenoch seems to be on a farm most days making statements.
She's wearing her wellies, yes.
Have you had any issues with animals or kids or stunts like this?
I just think you have to be really careful because anything like this that can be videoed and has the opportunity to go wrong. I think
it does also feel like Thanksgiving. I mean, I'm going to a Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday. It feels like, it's not quite Halloween, but it's becoming more of a thing in this country.
A little bit, but more the Halloween and the Christmas that we know is such a big deal over in the States.
I always say that anything that involves putting marshmallows on vegetables should be actively encouraged in this country, even if it is Thanksgiving. James, listen, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight here on Sky News as we talk about Donald Trump there pardoning a turkey for Thanksgiving. Well, that is it for me for tonight and indeed the team, but we are back at 7 tomorrow. We'll have full coverage of that crucial budget, a budget, as I say, that could determine the future of the British economy and indeed the government over the next 3.5 years. Do join us then if you can. Up next, it's the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. Have a good evening. Goodbye.